going to try and turn this simple plywood box into something like this. That's a Louis Vuitton trunk. I mean, just look at some of these fabulous trunks. There's one for a wardrobe, a mobile office, a bookshelf, and there's even one for a Japanese tea ceremony. And of course one for your dog. Sorry Willie, I'm not sure we'll fit you into one of these. We'll see. But I mean, look at those prices. I mean, just how hard can it be? Well, let's start with what's easy about it. And given the price of these trunks, some of this will surprise you. Okay, first up, they are built around a basic poplar plywood box, which is put together using nails and glue. So in other words, no fancy woodworking joints, no dovetail joints, no rebates, pretty straightforward construction. Lightweight, I suppose. And this is then lined with a coated canvas. Yes, that's right, there's no leather here, which also surprised me. Various different canvases are used. I opted for the traditional checkerboard pattern, which is easily cut and then glued to the box using simple cardboard templates. There's actually very little real wood used in any of these trunks, apart from the base frame, where there is a simple wooden frame, although it's hard to know for sure as it's a little intimidating to go into one of their shops. But I'm going with a basic oak frame wrapped around a protective aluminium sheet, which can be seen in many of the old vintage trunks and makes it somewhat water resistant too. The distinctive slats historically used to protect the trunk from being thrown around are of wood, typically beech, and are relatively straightforward to make and shape and add to the trunk. Nowadays they're added to the trunk because they look good. They give that vintage character. But of course they do add some strength and bracing to the cask. So easy peasy so far, but there were a few hiccups along the way. Take the hinges for example. On most of the high-end trunks they're actually concealed behind the canvas. After a fair bit of head scratching, I realised this could be achieved in several ways. By adding a layer of hardboard, I achieved the same result, but also had the added benefit of providing extra thickness, extra meat for those hinge nails to hold on to. Having glued over the hinges with the canvas, knowing precisely where to place the nails was not so easy. Keep in mind I need the exact spot. One out of alignment nail sticks out like a sore thumb. Nothing can be skew with, that's a word, but passing a needle back through from the inside solved the problem, giving me the exact spot for the nails. It may seem obvious, maybe not, but it's super important to have evenly spaced nails that are also perfectly lined up. Otherwise everything will look again skew with. This takes a bit of planning as I needed to work out every nail hole position ahead of time. A bit of arithmetic and some cardboard templates to guide me did the job. The pros will line the edges with a specialised material called lozine. This is hard to come by, but honestly it looks a little plasticky to me, so instead we're using some beautiful French leather fixed with small brass nails. And using some double-sided tape stops the leather strips from sliding all over the shop. Here at the corners, taking my time, I'm removing small but precise sections of the canvas to allow room for the leather, otherwise we'll end up with the double thickness. Not all trunks have a belt, but this extra step will make all the difference, as it is both functional, it reinforces the plywood box, and aesthetic, as it looks great, somehow completing the look of the trunk. Just a strip of leather glued around a steel band, but making sure to add a slightly thinner strip of backing board. This allows the top to overlap the bottom, otherwise it won't close. It's ideal to use one single piece of leather, but the hide just wasn't long enough, so I'm forced to use two pieces and then hide the join underneath the front lock. And the installation isn't difficult as long as you keep that steel strip thin enough to allow it to be bent around the corner by hand. All of the many nail holes are pre-drilled to avoid splitting, and the nails used are extra long to allow for either riveting or clinching. This is very traditional and brings impressive amounts of strength to the overall structure. It lasts almost forever, as can be seen on old beaten up trunks. Clinching is done when you bend back over that sticky outy bit and drive it back into the wood. It's so easy to damage the decorative nail head when clinching. You need something solid to support the nail head as you pound and effectively staple that nail back over. I placed a block of something softer than brass, aluminium in this case, under the nail head, which worked well enough, although was a wee bit fiddly. Finding the right hardware was a project in itself. I wanted to use solid brass nails and hinges, not coated, that also looked great. This is really important as it sets the piece off, and luckily for me, after a ton of research, I came across a mysterious French guy with a cool French accent who restores these things for a living, and et voila. Being more of a woodworker than a leather worker, the traditional thick leather handle was the trickiest piece for me. Cutting the handle shape requires a very sharp knife. Here I'm using a proper leather knife, which I bought just for this. Keeping things authentic, I'm hand stitching using the traditional saddle stitch, which is very strong. And I really enjoy it. There's something quite zen about it, especially as I'm so slow. But that thick leather is tough on those fingers. In the end, I used stitching chisels to initialize the holes and followed all the way through with a sharp awl, which worked pretty well. It's worth saying that as I'm building a mini version of the trunk, only the top of the trunk was wide enough for a full-size handle. There's usually one on each side. Of course, it's quite useless as luggage nowadays without wheels or a telescopic arm, so I decided to turn it into something useful. A tool chest for some of my most used woodworking tools as a gift for my son. I'm aiming for something more industrial looking on the inside, so rather than fabric, as is often the case, I'm making some aluminium panels which are framed with rosewood, partly to hide the various rivet holes, partly for decoration. Apart from annoying metal shavings all over the place, the aluminium panels were straightforward to cut and shape. The trunk lid stay was, well, a bit of a headache. Working out the position of the lower nail takes some thought. It was also awkward to fit, as riveting it was, well, tricky, given the need to have a countering force, that's the aluminium block, and the lack of space for me, the light, the hammer, and the camera. And to finish it off, I've added a simple tool tray made from some beautiful ebony. So here it is, a half-size DIY version of the Louis Vuitton courier trunk. Here in Europe, the craft of trunk making is very secretive, and those high prices can create a sense of something unattainable. And of course, there are some challenges, but hopefully this shows you that anyone with some woodworking skills and a bit of patience can build themselves a trunk that otherwise they probably couldn't afford.
Come on, Willie. Come on, in you get. What do you think? Happy Christmas. In you get. Come on, jump in.